Now, most of that news was too late for the Sunday papers. We'll bring in the panel now for the news that until then dominated all of the front pages, the grounding of Qantas. And Laura Tingle, this is a massive call for an airline to ground its entire fleet.
It's a huge call, Barry. The brand damage, before we go into the politics, is going to be massive. The sorts of social media feedback we've seen since the announcement has been exceptionally bad. It's a big call. Probably, ultimately, though, it's a good one, not for passengers who are stranded around the country, but this has been a series of separate industrial disputes that have to be resolved one way or t'other. And it's about a variety of different issues. So it's going to test the airline, but it's going to test the Fair Work Australia system, but hopefully will create some certainty if we get some certainty in the next couple of weeks before Christmas.
Yeah, we'll get on to the test for the government in a moment, but Jared, I suppose the Qantas would say, well, what choice did they have? They were losing millions of dollars a day, and people were being messed around everywhere.
Well, the airline's bleeding to death. The unions are talking about industrial disputation that would last for 12 months. Forward bookings are obviously down. I mean, in my own family, I know people aren't booking Qantas the way they used to because they're worried there won't be certainty. So this dispute would have gone on, and it had to be resolved. Now, it's terrible for travellers, but it was going to be terrible at any rate because the airline would bleed to death on this basis because there is a view within the ACTU and certainly within the Qantas unions that people should have secure employment. Now, in this world in which we live, there is virtually no such thing as secure employment unless you work in the public service. These Qantas employees no longer work in the public service. No one can guarantee them secure employment. Qantas is losing massive amounts of money on its international flights. It's doing well domestically, but it's bleeding and it had to be resolved.
George?
Qantas is still carrying the Australian flag, though, so this is a big issue post the privatisation of an asset like this. Whether there is a role for a high-wage workforce, a set of Australian standards to carry an Australian flag, and I think that this is one of these debates that has probably been a number of years in coming for this country. We've seen it with a couple of the other formerly government-owned assets. Telstra were a rogue company for a number of years. Qantas's management may be behaving a little on the risky side because, in a sense, they've escalated industrial action by basically locking out the country and not just the workforce. And I think at some point people are going to have to get their heads around whether the market sets the price for this company or whether there's something else that maybe public interest demands gets sorted out.
And Laura, it's just the first really big test for the government on industrial relations? For this particular government?
I think it is. I mean, governments really are made on the issues that they sort of find themselves confronting. It is a huge test for the government at a time when all the usual suspects are saying something slightly off script, if you like. I think the coalition is divided on this issue. We've also got the question that they're very reluctant to be looking to aggro on industrial relations. But I think the really important thing here is if the Fair Work Australia system works and ends up arbitrating this case on a compulsory basis and we get an outcome, that's going to completely change the political game, I think, on industrial relations and will hopefully for the government and in terms of sort of smooth sailing ahead would end up sorting that issue of whether the Fair Work Australia system does work. And
it seemed to be, at least the unions are saying, there was a degree of deception on the part of the airlines, George, because they had their annual general meeting on Friday. No hint of this.
No hint of this, but some bookings obviously got made at some point in the last 24 hours because there are a lot of hotels that were on the ready for some pretty grumpy Qantas travellers who couldn't make their flights or were stranded somewhere else. So there's a couple of interesting questions for management here, whether the thing got cooked up or not. The government are a bit suspicious. They wouldn't give you this publicly, but from what I understand, the government is wondering what was going on the last couple of days. A couple of the premiers wrote a letter out of the blue on Thursday calling the government to intervene, and then Tony Abbott almost completely off coalition script wanted the government to settle this dispute. I don't know at which threshold a government gets involved in dispute. Obviously there was an escalation yesterday and there was no choice but to intervene.
I suspect this is a conspiracy theory. Look, the dispute was getting to a very bad stage. Someone had to do something. I don't really think... I mean, the idea that you would take this to an annual general meeting which reports back essentially on the Qantas's report is is not my view of how our annual general meetings work. They don't work like that. The matter went to the board. It seems that the management has the support of the chairman and the board. If the management has the support of the chairman and the board, that's all you'd need. You don't need to put these things through an annual general meeting.
But if you did it on a Saturday,
as I understand it, on Saturday, but this stuff is market sensitive.
Yes.
Well, one is market sensitive, so you're keeping it out of the market. You're certainly not telling the shareholders. And I suppose there is the basically public relations debacle of seeing Alan Joyce getting voted a huge pay rise, the day before all of this happens. Now, maybe he wanted to lock it in before it all sort of fell to pieces, but nonetheless, I think you can see why, without it being a conspiracy, you wouldn't tell anybody at an annual general meeting, oh, by the way, we're about to ground the entire airline, but at the same time, I think it sort of starts Qantas off on the absolute back foot in a public relations sense.
You mentioned that the Premier's... Sorry, Jerry, we just need to go on with Tony Abbott's intervention on this, because you mentioned the Premiers had spoken out on this. Tony Abbott agrees with them and he blames the government. Here he is.
This is a crisis that could have been avoided. The government has been procrastinating for weeks about this, and now it's urgent that it be solved immediately. This is, in the end, a test of competence for this government.
Now, Jared, Peter Reith would say, though, that governments should not intervene in these cases. Tony Abbott's signalling there that an Abbott-led government, he would be prepared to intervene in industrial disputes.
Well, I wouldn't have intervened, but I do think the government should have shown much greater support for Qantas early on. There was some support from the government against, when some of the unions were telling people not to fly Qantas, and some ministers, like Minister Albanese, criticised the union movement. But broadly, there wasn't a lot of support for Qantas in this. Now, bear in mind, you're talking about Labor governments. When the Ansett pilots had a dispute 2 decades ago, the Hawke government gave massive support to Ansett, and it even put up in the military, it put in the RAAF to fly people around. Now, this has not happened on this occasion. There's been an absence of support for Qantas, which I think it deserved a long time ago, because anyone looking at this knew that this airline was bleeding to death, and there was little public comment from the government in support of Qantas management.
Sorry, Jared, but the world has changed since then. Yes, there was massive support. We're also in a much more centralised industrial relations system then than we were now. This is this crucial issue here. Are governments supposed to intervene here or not? Now, I think, without a doubt, you're going to end up getting centralised arbitration. But Alan Joyce and Qantas haven't wanted the government to be intervening here.
I didn't argue the government should intervene. I said the opposite. I didn't say they should intervene. I'm not agreeing with Tony Abbott on that.
Done?
What I said was they should have given some public support.
But how? In what way?
Just talk it up.
Just rhetorically?
No, well, not support. I mean, all these unions are affiliated to the Labor Party. Some of the key figures in this dispute are senior figures in the Labor Party. They should have been out there publicly talking about this, just geeing the thing up. This is not an interference. This is what the government has done in other disputes.
Jared, I wonder though, and I noted very carefully what Julia Gillard was saying at the doorstop last night. Any time a government takes aside an industrial dispute before the thing reached the point it did yesterday, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, if the government were saying, "Come on, let's sort this out," at which point does every industrial dispute go on the government's desk?
This government is talking how. And I support a lot of things the government does. This government is talking about how we are part of the international economy. You were talking about, earlier, about having a special high rate for certain people in Qantas. So when you fly Virgin, as I did last night, they're not getting the rates these Qantas employees are getting. So what you're suggesting is there should be some kind of Qantas airline which pays higher rates. Now, in the world of international airlines, this is just bizarre.
OK, yeah, we'll have to move on. But you mentioned the social media feedback on this, Laura. There's a tweet as published in The Age this morning that says Barnaby is now the second stupidest Joyce in Australia. I think that kind of... it's a bit harsh, but there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah.
And there's somebody in America that's feeling the heat as well.
That's right. The social media feedback on this has been vicious towards Qantas, but feel sorry for the American university student called Alan Joyce, who's known as at Alan Joyce at Twitter, who everybody's accidentally mistaken for the Irish-Australian Alan Joyce, and has been being berated overnight, much to his bemusement, as he sits at Stanford University.
OK, well, our program guest this morning coming up shortly is the Trade Minister, Craig Emerson. But for a federal government perspective on the Qantas issue, we're now joined by the Assistant Treasurer and former Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, Bill Shorten.